Some and now none of you. By Is This Username Available or Not? Chapter 5. But I would lay my armor down. Thoughts of Camelot and Arthur itched at his brain, unwilling to let Merlin sleep. Morgana's words weighed on his mind, and he pondered over them. He instantly said no to her, of course, but it wasn't as simple as that. He was hurt and angry and resentful, but he did not hate Arthur. He knows he should, and he tried to. When he finally settled here and had nothing to occupy his mind with, he'd attempted to convince himself that every memory with Arthur up until that fateful day was tainted. He'd taken Arthur's harsh words from that day and tried to fit them into the mouths of a softer version of Arthur that lingered in his mind. Those memories that seemed so much kinder, so much more like the man he had thought he knew. But it never worked. No matter how much he tried to twist it, the warmth he'd felt for those moments still existed, and it made the hurt that much harder to bear. For all his hatred of magic, the prince he had known, the one he had watched mature into a fine man, would never have said those things to Merlin. He was wrong. He knew that on principle, considering Arthur had said all those words. But that feeling of wrongfulness was enough to stop him from hating the old Arthur. He couldn't reconcile the man who looked at him with such disgust with the one who had defied his father's direct orders and risked his life to retrieve a flower to save his servant. There had been so many more moments between that. Arthur draping his cloak over Merlin's shoulders without a word when he was shivering in the rain, trading amused glances during a long, dull council meetings. Arthur, who once told a noble to shut up when they mocked Merlin's clumsiness. Arthur, who always let Merlin speak out of turn, who rolled his eyes and called him an idiot, but still turned to look at him when things went wrong. Arthur, who had trusted him again and again. Arthur, whom Merlin had trusted just the same. And in the end, Arthur had shared that trust like it wasn't something sacred, like it hadn't been carved from years of loyalty and something akin to friendship, but probably more. Merlin figured he'd probably done the same in not telling him about his magic, but he was getting around to it. Damn it. He'd started to think Arthur would begrudgingly come around, but it seems the prince couldn't even fathom the idea of his friend, no, servant, being a sorcerer. He knew also that separating the before and the now was stupid. They were the same person. The man he had called his friend had always held the capacity to turn on him. Still, it was jarring. So Merlin couldn't hate Arthur. He'd loved him too much for too long for that. He thought Arthur had too. But, well... Merlin pulled the covers up to his head, hoping the complete darkness would force his brain to shut up. He didn't want to think about Morgana's request or the desperation in her eyes or the thought of stupid Arthur dying. He wondered if Kilgara had foreseen this, Merlin being cast from the land he was supposed to unite by the man he was destined to guide. He couldn't ask, but he wouldn't. He'd long stopped speaking to the old dragon when it became clear that all he wanted to talk about was his destiny. Still, that didn't stop him from remembering the dragon's words from a lifetime ago. A half cannot hate what truly makes it whole. Another thing the overgrown lizard was wrong about then. Arthur hated him. There could never be any doubt. about that after he had made such painfully clear. Merlin went to sleep with a golden-haired boy, an unfulfilled destiny, and a longing for his home still on his mind. He awoke only a few hours later to a shrill scream. Merlin wasted no time, ripping off the covers and running to Morgana and Leon's room, his magic at the tip of his fingers waiting for his command. When he entered, it was not to face down a beast or foe of any sort. Morgana was shaking, her knees brought to her chest, incoherent words coming out of her mouth. Leon was on the floor beside her, rubbing her back soothingly. He looked up at the sudden entrance, and Merlin caught the concern in his eyes, clear as day. What happened? Morgana seemed too dazed to even look up at the sound of his voice in her head, remained tucked into Leon's neck. Leon whispered, Nightmare. She's been getting a lot of them for a while. Oh, did she say anything? Merlin asked, his voice soft. Leon hesitated. Just fragments. She was screaming Arthur's name right before she woke. Merlin's breath caught. Of course. Oh, does she need anything? I can get some water. She'll be fine. She's already asleep, I think. He nodded after checking and laying her back down. She'll be okay, Merlin. Don't worry, he reassured. It didn't ease the uncomfortable feeling in his stomach. Still, he nodded to Leon and left. Merlin did not go back to sleep after that. He didn't even try. He simply sat on the front of the fire and let the dam break, allowing every traitorous thought about Arthur flood his mind once again. He sat there pondering, watching the sunrise. Eventually, he got up and started prepping for the day. He put an herbal calming draught into a simmer and began cataloging his inventory of dried herbs and bottled extracts. The comforting smell of lavender wafted through the room, and the mixture heated up, mingling without traces of rosemary and parchment. He made a mental note to collect some more frost leaf the next few days. The weather was getting chillier, and it would be a vital ingredient in his cold, soothing brews that people would soon come knocking for. Merlin was halfway through his morning routine when he heard the footsteps on the stairs. Leon appeared, looking only slightly more rested than the night before. Morning, Merlin said, glancing up. She's still asleep? Leon huffed a quiet laugh. You know Morgana won't stir until the sun's halfway across the sky. Merlin smiled, already reaching for the pan. Some things never change. He pulled out a few ingredients. I'll get breakfast going for us then. Leon shook his head and joined him in the little cooking space. Nonsense! You're clearly busy. I can do it. You're my guest. I'm not going to let you cook for yourself. What would my mother say? I feel more like an intruder, considering we showed up uninvited, actually. Leon snatched the knife out of his hands and elbowed him out of the way to continue chopping the onions and mushrooms Merlin had just started on. Merlin huffed, giving up the fight and returning to stirring the pot. Not at all. You can't know how happy I am to see you two. It gets dull around here sometimes. Leon hummed. Seems like a nice place, though. Everyone was very welcoming when we went around yesterday. It is. I do like it here. It's just... Merlin shrugged, cutting off his words. He didn't want to say it. Leon nodded and glanced at him reassuringly. Of course. He added the vegetables into a pan with some sausages that Merlin usually just saved for rare occasions. As stupid as it was, they always reminded him of the mornings buzzing around Arthur's room, trying to rouse him and popping a few in his mouth in between. What a prat, honestly, ruining sausages for him. The two worked in comfortable silence. They enjoyed breakfast together. It was exceptional, and Merlin was glad he let Leon take over. Then Merlin put Leon to work, helping around the shop. A few villagers came in, looking for relief from some ailment or treatment or of little injuries. It was a peaceful morning. Morgana woke around midday. No one mentioned the nightmare, and they had a hearty lunch of lentil stew and warm rye bread. If Morgana noticed the calming draft he slipped into the water, she didn't comment on it. Merlin closed the shop for a few hours after that. He showed them around the village, and they brought warm buns and cakes from his favorite bakery, and they sat by the lake for a while, enjoying them, while the two caught Merlin up on everything in Camelot. Lancelot finally asked for Gwen's hand in marriage. Gawain had given Arthur hell for months after he'd left, but stayed anyways. When Merlin asked why, Leon replied that he was pretty sure it was merely so he could torment Arthur forever, and Merlin couldn't find the fault in that assessment. Gaius was getting grouchier with age, Percival had his eyes on a pretty girl from the village, and Elian was on a strict bed rest after taking a bad hit during a bandit attack. No one directly mentioned Arthur, and Merlin was glad for it. Surprisingly, Morgana didn't even reignite the argument to convince him to come back to Camelot. They all simply enjoyed each other's company. The days passed in a blur like that. Merlin woke every night to the sound of Morgana's distress. On the fourth day, they were at the lake again, and Leon was teaching Morgana how to fish. They were all sitting on the bank, trousers rolled up, legs dipped in the cold water as they waited for a fish to take the bait. Leon and Merlin were squabbling around who'd catch the larger fish, and it was odd that Morgana wasn't butting in to insist it would obviously be her. Merlin glanced at her, and she was lost deep in thought, a frown on her face as she watched the sparkling water. He nudged her shoulder. "What's wrong?" Snapping out of it, she shook her head lightly. "Why would something be wrong?" It was Leon who replied, "You were quiet for a while there." Merlin nodded seriously. "Yeah, don't scare us like that. We're too used to your obnoxious prattling." Morgana narrowed her eyes. "I don't prattle. You do." "Ah, but you agree it's obnoxious," he teased. She rolled her eyes. "You're obnoxious." Leon kicked his feet and splashed her with water. "That was weak from you, Morgana." She splashed back, resolutely ignoring their questioning looks. Merlin got dragged into the water fight because, of course, Morgana had to attack him too. They abandoned their fishing lines and spent the next few minutes acting like children, merely splashing each other, laughing breathlessly, and trying not to slip on the smooth stones near the bank. Morgana shrieked when Merlin managed to push her into the lake, and she ended up submerged to her shoulders. He howled with laughter until Leon avenged her by yanking him by the collar and fully dunking his head in. Merlin used magic for a quick second to make the knight trip over his own feet and slip off the bank into the water. The evening passed in laughter, light-hearted bickering after they'd finally flopped on the bank to dry off a little. None of them managed to catch enough fish for dinner, so they showed up sopping wet at the tavern, too hungry to go back home to change. The barmaid, of course, didn't turn them out. She did eye them with a little contempt, but wordlessly served them warm stew and hunks of almost fresh bread with a side of exasperation. He wasn't sure if it was because she recognized Morgana or she just didn't want to turn down good coin. He wasn't complaining either way. After they had their fill, Morgana hesitantly spoke up. "I think we should start heading back tomorrow morning." Merlin blinked in surprise. "But you said you had a week here." Leon looked just as confused, but he watched patiently. "I know, I'm sorry." She folded his hands between her own over the tabletop. "I've had so much fun here, and I promise to visit again." Soon, but right now I don't feel right leaving Arthur there. It feels like anything could go wrong, and I wouldn't even be by his side for it." She was masking her words because Leon, who was not aware of the nature of Morgana's dreams nor her magic, was present. Merlin sighed and nodded, understanding. "Right, of course." He squeezed her hands gently. "You don't have to apologize, though." Morgana looked at him, hope dancing across her eyes. "Have you reconsidered? You could come with us." Merlin deflated. Morgana gave a tight smile. "It's fine. I'm sorry for pressuring you about it, but I had to try." And that was all. The walk back home was mostly quiet. Morgana and Leon agreed to set out at dawn, then seemed content to drink in the village one last time. They stopped to grab more goods from the bakery, claiming Camelot didn't have anything nearly as good. It made the old baker's day. Back at his house, they fluttered about packing. Merlin supplied them with a few handy treatments and tinctures, food and water. Between that and everything they brought at the little market, their bags were overflowing. Merlin whispered a charm to make the load lighter and easier for the horses to carry. Morgana had went to search for her boots, and Leon and he were alone. Merlin handed him some bandages, in case they got wounded from skirmish with bandits or something. "Thanks," Leon said. He paused for a moment before adding hesitantly, "Listen, I don't know why Arthur did what he did, but Morgana is a good judge of character. And more than that, you're a good man, Merlin." Merlin had no idea where this was going. "I have no doubt that Arthur was just being rash in his decision. I'm very sorry you had to suffer for it. You didn't deserve that." Oh, wow. Leon was loyal to the crown, almost to a fault, so the words meant more coming from him than they would almost anyone else. "Thanks," he smiled. "Not suffering, though. I'm fine," he insisted, shrugging carelessly. "You deserve to be happy, not just fine." Leon ruffled his hair, and it felt like such a brotherly gesture that it made Merlin's heart warm and reminded him of the other knights who'd welcome him into their fold as if they were one of them. God, how he missed them. Merlin didn't know what to say to such kind words, so he settled on, "He would call you a girl's blouse for that, you know." Leon laughed heartily. "He would." Merlin joined him, tucked away his hurt for a while. They all soon retired to bed, having an early start ahead of them. Merlin didn't sleep. He thought. He turned over his decision over and over again in his head, trying to weigh it against the alternative. Thinking about it logically, there was no question what he should do. It was his heart, his hurt, his pride that were making it difficult to come to terms with. And what if Arthur turned him out again? Merlin didn't think he'd be able to handle that. He tried to take Morgana's word that Arthur wouldn't, and that he supposedly had changed, but even that was difficult to reconcile with the Arthur that had banished him. He thought of Morgana's never-ending visions and her terrified scream. She wouldn't be able to face whatever threat Arthur faced on her own, and Merlin didn't want to subject her to that anyway. She was powerful. Of that there was no doubt, but no more than himself, and besides, Merlin had years of practice at it. Saving the royal Pratt's life was practically a routine at one point. He thought of Gaius, too, his father, and everything but blood. He deserves to retire, not be a burden by the weight of his decision. Should the kingdom struggle under a new physician, or a malicious one, or none at all. He didn't allow himself to think of Arthur for long. If he went back, he swore to himself he would not crumble. He would remain aloof and act as if nothing more than court physician. Arthur didn't deserve even an ounce more than that. Merlin sighed and got up. It didn't take long to pack his belongings. Deciding what to do about the apothecary took longer. Eventually, he rolled out a leaf parchment and ruled the lines along the entire length of then wrote a note at the top. Write your ailment, your symptoms, on a line next to your name. Check back here after a few hours, and if your medicine will be on the counter. No payment is required. Consider it my thanks for accepting me into your village so easily. It wouldn't be too difficult to send medicines from Camelot to Oakmar with his magic, which he hadn't bothered to keep secret here. So far from the stifling laws of Camelot, the people here trusted him, and he had become an important part of their community in this short time here. It would be cruel to rob them of the help they'd grown to depend on. He stuck the parchment on the main countertop and set about organizing the already made tonics into small carts. Anything for headaches in one, other for stomach aches, and so on. They were meticulously labeled, so he hoped no one would struggle with finding what they needed. Whatever wasn't readily available or ran out, they would use the parchment for. He hoped to explain it all to the beekeeper next door, and to Wren as well in the morning. Hopefully, that would be enough. He scarcely believed he was actually doing this. He started picking his equipment and ingredients. Halfway through folding the herbs into small pouches, Morgana's scream echoed through the walls. Merlin frowned but continued working, more solidified in his decision. Leon had her. When the sky started turning dusty pink, the two of them rose again, and when they came downstairs at the sight of Merlin trying to fit his mortar and pestle somewhere within his bag, shock flitted over their faces. Morgana recovered first and enveloped him in a hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you!" She was squeezing the life out of him and started muttering reassurances that Arthur wouldn't banish him again and that everybody would be happy to see him. Behind her, Leon grinned and clapped his back. They had a lighter breakfast and started the journey back to Camelot just as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled across the horizon, casting long shadows behind them. Begrudgingly, Merlin was content with his decision. Reader's notes. That was chapter 5, everyone. Merlin's going back to Camelot, and we'll see how that goes. Have a wonderful day. Drink water. Thank you so much to the author of this fic. I'm enjoying it very much. Bye. Have a good day.